In this video, I'm going to cover the frequently asked questions that I get that have helped our nonprofits achieve over $18 million in NSGP funding. Let's dive straight in. So the first question that I often get is, why do most people fail? Now, I review around 100 NSGP applications a year. If my organization, Kingswood Security, has not written the application, I will read it to see why someone might have been successful. At the same time, if someone is unsuccessful in their application, I would also read it to try and see the best practice. What have they done wrong? Now, one of the commonalities that I often see is that people forget that this grant is for two things. If you've been to one of my webinars, you know the answer if you're listening for the first time. The NSGP was started in 2004 by George Bush Jr. This is a terrorism and extremism grant. The reason why most people fail is they forget this. Yes, it's important that you might have burglaries at your church. Yes, it's important that you've had human brokenness. It could be a husband with a non-contact order who's come to a church. Yes, it's important if you've had some sexual misconduct. If it could even be some child sexual misconduct, you could have a theft. Those are very important and valid, and I don't want to undermine those serious crimes. However, this is a terrorism and extremism grant. You do not need to have been the victim yourself, but you need to articulate to the reader two things. Why are you at high risk of terrorism? Very difficult. Why are you high risk at extremism? And again, I preach on this regularly. There are so many divisive issues that we have if you're a house of worship. Our theology really determines our views on homosexuality, on a woman's right to abort her babies, so abortion issues. It could be transgender, it could be reproductive rights, it could be around immigration. There's so many divisive issues that we have where there's extremist groups on both sides. So focus on terrorism, difficult. The second classification is extremism, a little bit easier for us in a house of worship. So that is the right reason why many people fail, is they forget that this is a terrorism and extremism grant. So the second thing I often get is, how many people can apply from one location? Now, as I go through these frequently asked questions, I'm going to give you some insight that your state can deny your application based on the information that you provide them, and there is no transparency and there is no rationale provided by them as to why you are unsuccessful in the application. I've had many clients that have reached out, but most states are actually prohibited from giving you feedback. One of the reasons is they could be giving you a competitive advantage over someone else. It's one of the reasons why a lot of the FEMA and Homeland Security grants are quite vague in key areas, because they can be giving you a competitive advantage. However, let's go back to the next frequently asked question. How many people can apply from one location? Where I see people go wrong in this frequently asked question is you might have two or even three nonprofits working from the same building. Only one of you can apply. Only one of you can apply. It is only permissible for one 501c3 nonprofit to apply for the NSGP grant per location. So just by chance, and I've had this recently with a couple of clients, you might have a school, which is a separate 501c3. You might have someone rent your building. It could be a ministry. They could also be a 501c3. Only one 501c3 can apply in that building. If three people make the application, it's more than likely two of them, and you don't know at the time until the reviewer determines which one, two of you would just be dismissed because you're outside the parameters of the NSGP. Only one nonprofit can apply, and a nonprofit is a 501c3 status. There's many people out there that say a nonprofit is acceptable. No, for this grant, it calls for 501c3 status as defined by the IRS. So the next frequently asked question where people often go wrong is who should write your vulnerability assessment. Now, I preach in my webinars, the vulnerability assessment is the heartbeat of your application. And I know our Jewish brothers and sisters at the Secure Community Network and also FEMA themselves. I was on a FEMA webinar only last week where they reiterated what I'm about to say to you. The entire process is based off the vulnerabilities in your vulnerability assessment. So if you are new to safety and security, if safety and security is not something you've done before, if you are not what might be considered an expert in safety and security, both the Secure Community Network, our Jewish brothers and sisters, FEMA, and myself, I recommend that you have a professional vulnerability assessment completed. It is the heartbeat of the application. You can only apply for things that are inside that vulnerability assessment. So it makes sense that this is the checks and balances for your SAA, the State Administrative Agency. It's their checks and balances that if we give Simon $150,000 funds, or the last round for the NSS was $200,000, does Simon know what all his risk and vulnerabilities are? And does Simon know what are the best mitigation strategies to reduce or try to manage some of those risks? Not all risks can be mitigated. Some risks can only be managed. And we have this quite a lot in House of Worship because we're inherently risky in the types of groups that we serve. So the answer to the question is who should write your vulnerability assessment? I strongly encourage you to work with a security professional such as myself, or reach out to your local police department, or reach out to FEMA or local Homeland Security and say, do you know someone in your area that can help us with our vulnerability assessment? It is a key metric of success. Remember, everything you apply for has to be in that vulnerability assessment. And more than that, it's their checks and balances. It is the heartbeat of the application. So I strongly encourage you to consider a professional vulnerability assessment. The next question where some people can get caught out in my next FAQ is, do we need to own our building? Now, the answer to this is no. However, where some people fall foul of this when I read their applications is that they haven't reached out to the building owner or their landlord to say, we're going to apply for $200,000 for the NSS. We're hoping that this year the NSGP may be $200,000 as well. But we're going to ask for these security enhancements, which could be access control, which could be cameras, it could be a mass notification system, lighting, new doors, locks, bullet-resistant glass, safety film, or whatever else it is you want. Most landlords are going to say, oh, yeah, Simon, go ahead. You please, by all means, because what does it do? It enhances the security of the building. It mitigates some of their risk. And then when you leave, if you ever leave, if you're a tenant, more than likely, you're not going to start taking those things with you. So most landlords would be in agreement if you're trying to enhance your safety and security. However, I really encourage you to write a letter from them that you can apply with your application to remove that question from the SAA, the State Administrative Agency. They are the person that is going to be grading your application. So do you need to own your building? The answer is no. Where people go wrong is they do not have a letter from their landlord saying we give consent for these security measures. A next frequent asked question is, we don't occupy our building yet. Can we still apply? I must get 3 to 5 emails a week about this. I think this is most probably my biggest question that I get asked around the NSGP. It could be that our church has plans to grow into a multi-site. It could be that we're building a new site. It could be that we're in a renovation stage, but we're not yet occupying our building. The answer is no. You must occupy the building at the time of your application, which makes sense. So if you are looking towards a multi-site church or you're moving, no, these are for measures that you need now, not for in the future. So do we need to occupy our buildings? The frequent asked question, the answer is yes. The next question is, will the state come to our building? Now, I joke a little bit about this and say, are they going to put the microchip in your brain and start telling your pastor what to preach? I've been in and around this grant for a long time, and it is my belief that one of the reasons why FEMA and Homeland Security invest in this grant is that we know that nonprofits are inherently risky. We know that they often have antiquated or outdated surveillance systems, access control or lack of access control, or we don't have emergency planning. So the goal of this grant is to enhance, remember the two things from the first frequently asked question, is to enhance our response, our resiliency towards terrorism and extremism. So will the state come to your building? I have never seen this. The grant was created to secure your environment. I have seen it once, and I say this during my webinar, that I believe the church was, I don't want to say lying, but the church was a little bit misleading in some of the statements they made. I think the SAA, the State Administrative Agency, had lots of time on their hands and they came to church. Most often, this is going to be email communication. This is going to be through phone calls, and this could even be snail mail. But most often it is email communication, uploading documents. Depending on your state, on the post application, you have to go in line and create a profile in your state's portal. So most of this is done online. So will the state come to our building? No, this was started to help combat terrorism and extremism. If you stay close to that, if you submit a transparent application, it's highly unlikely they're going to come. There is no microchip. There is no telling your pastor what to preach. This is designed to enhance the safety and security of your building. The next FAQ which we get is, should we go heavy on our faith? Now, I started this video saying that we've helped organizations get over $18 million. I read over 100 applications a year that either my team have written or that other people have written. If they're successful, I read them. If they're unsuccessful, then I read them. Now, quite often, people will go heavy on your faith, which is the next FAQ. Should we go heavy on our faith? The reason why I say no is that this is a non-profit grant. This is not a church or religious grant. Let me say the FAQ again. Should we go heavy on our faith is the FAQ. My answer is no. This is a terrorism and extremism grant for non-profits, not for faith organizations. We don't know if your SAA, his or her parents went through a bad divorce when they were younger and they can't stand religion as a result of it. They were forced to go to church as a child and hated it. They could be an atheist and a very strong non-believer of faith. There's all these different things that they could be, and they're grading your application. As much as we don't want implicit or explicit bias to come in as application, it may sneak in a little bit. So we want to remain focused on those two things. This is a terrorism grant, an extremism grant for those at high risk. Do not go heavy on your faith. Go heavy on those extremists that might come to your house of worship to cause you harm, those extremists that might come to your house of worship to protest. So that frequently asked question is, should we go heavy on our faith? No, focus on terrorism and extremism. This is a non-profit grant. This is not a church grant. Now, in the recent edition of the NSS, what we call the National Security Supplement, maybe many of you might have applied for this. There were some very specific groups where they were going to push the funding towards, and they increased the number to $200,000. Now, ordinarily, the NSGP allows for $150,000 maximum of 3 locations, which means you can ask for a maximum of $450,000. The NSS, the National Security Supplement, which we just had, We haven't had the announcements yet. That was $200,000 per location, a maximum of $600,000. So this frequently asked question is, the proposals we have are more than the amount allotted. What should we do? Now, when I read applications that have been unsuccessful, I do see that if the state, as an example, can give you $150,000, I know many of you out there watching this video, you have a really high technology debt, right? Because maybe it's not your fault, but the person before you, the church, ignored the technology, and all of a sudden a security integrator comes around and says, well, you need $340,000 to get this right. And you're saying, well, how on earth did we get here? Well, there was technology debt over many years. Someone failed to keep pushing the needle forward on your security enhancements. So if that is you, and if you have things that are above the $200,000, if it stays there that it was for the NSS, or if they do drop it back to the $150,000, it's important that your proposals are beneath this amount of money. When you apply, what you don't want to do are to introduce questions. Those questions could be, Simon needs $280,000. I can only give him $150,000. How is he going to be able to afford to do these security enhancements if I can't give him all the money? Maybe I should give the funds to somewhere else. We don't even want the SAA, your state administrative agency, we don't even want to bring that question in their mindset. So what I suggest you do is, if your proposals are more than what you can apply for, is you need to do a phase 1, a phase 2, phase 3. I spoke to one of my clients last week about this. Never really have I ever come across a client that said, Simon, thank you for doing your vulnerability assessment. Let's do everything in there. I've never seen that even in the secular world. So ask them for a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and make sure those numbers are below the $200,000. Or if it does default back to the 150, that it's below the 150. And that is across all your proposals. Everything should be underneath what they can give you, because we don't want the question, how is Simon going to be able to afford this if I don't give him all the funds? So the next FAQ that I often have is, does the NSGP cover construction costs? So the answer is no. Similarly to if you don't have your building yet, and if you don't own your building, it doesn't cover construction costs. I had a client reached out to me and they actually were awarded the grant, and they said, we want to use some of the money to move our children's wing to a more secure part of the building. I said, they're not going to allow you to do that. The NSGP is for security enhancements. It cannot be used for construction costs. It can be used for things such as replacing doors, whether you consider that to be construction or not, but that's about as permanent a fixture that you can really ask for. So the answer to that FAQ is, does the NSGP cover construction costs? The answer is no. So all these questions, you are not going to do those things. So as I mentioned, me and my team have helped nonprofits over the last 4 years get over $18 million in NSGP funding across, I think it's at least 14, it could even be 15 states now. So if you need help with writing your nonprofit security grant program application, or if you need help with that professional vulnerability assessment that I mentioned, that is what my organization, Kingswood Security, do, and we travel across the country doing this. So I'll put the details below that you can reach out to me at team@kingswoodsc.com, team@kingswoodsc.com, if you're interested to have a conversation about what it might look like to work together on this NSGP and make you one of our next successful nonprofits. But for now, you stay safe. You have a blessed day. Take care, everybody.